Hey there guys, this is your host Richard with another marvellous video. Only a few Australian films have managed to leave as lasting and widespread a mark on pop culture as the Mad Max franchise. George Miller's post-apocalyptic film series went on to become a cult hit when it first hit theatres in 1979, standing as a highlight for the pinnacle of the Australian new wave and exploitation cinema. Over the past 40 years, the sequels has continued to keep us hooked with sequels like Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior in 1981, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome in 1985, Mad Max Fury Road in 2015, and of course, the recently released Furiosa, a new Mad Max saga in 2024. Of course, these films were critically acclaimed and enjoyed crazy commercial success, but even after the first Mad Max release, the movie hadn't quite managed to catch on with the American audience. Luckily, that changed when George Miller released Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, and if you didn't exist back then, you have absolutely no idea of the rage this 1981 sequel had become. Miller marketed this sequel by its subtitle, and even then, the newer fans had absolutely no trouble jumping right into the story. Plus, if you think Immortan Joe is George Miller's most accomplished villain, wait till you meet Lord Humungus. The dude's insanity is probably what put the Mad Max saga on the map, as The Road Warrior proved to become a popular culture phenomenon by being an over-the-top sequel which is bombastic, big, and rarely rooted in realism. While the 1979 Mad Max was a gritty, straightforward tale of revenge, barely hinting at its future setting throughout its short runtime, The Road Warrior introduced a major tonal shift for the franchise. Even if the film drops you right into the heart of the action, Max seems to be standing out as the most sane guy amongst an absolutely batshit crazy lineup of bad guys led by Lord Humungus. But I have one complaint. If you concocted such a fine villain, why rob the guy from his backstory? I'm guessing you already know what today's video is about, so without wasting another second, let's dig out everything we can on Lord Humungus. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
I'm gravely disappointed.
Who is the man behind the mask? When you look at the Mad Max series as a whole, it becomes inherently clear that George Miller had a grand vision for the franchise, as it continuously revisits similar themes across all its installments. However, the jump from the dark psychological tone of the original Mad Max film to the campy post-apocalyptic chaos of The Road Warrior might seem quite jarring at first. I mean, why promote it as a sequel when you could almost label it as a standalone film with the same protagonist? Well. What you didn't know was how there exists a missing bit of backstory that links the two films. While it was left out, this juicy backstory not only comes as a brain shocker, but also clarifies all the recurring themes that connect both the films. In Mel Gibson's Mad Max, we see a tough cop trying to maintain order in a small city. But as these things often go, by the end of the film, he ends up turning into a vengeance-crazed, battle-hardened angel of death, after losing his partner and family to a ruthless criminal gang. Having lost everything, Max methodically murders his way through these hoodlums and eventually becomes a troubled shell of the person he once used to be. That's exactly how we find him in the post-apocalyptic world of the 1981 sequel, The Road Warrior. But you know who never makes a comeback to the screen? Max partner's Jim Goose. I mean, yeah, he was almost charred in the first film, but we never exactly got any confirmation if Goose actually died from the gang's arson attack. Even when Max saw him at the hospital, he was alive and well. So I think there's an intriguing, almost canon explanation for this ambiguity. The Road Warrior reportedly included a twist where Lord Humungus was revealed to be Goose. Yeah, the same Goose who was Max's partner from the first movie and was assumed to be dead at the end. So the idea was that Jim Goose was driven insane after being brutally burnt alive by the ruthless biker gang, and that's exactly what pushed him toward his darker side in the interceding years. This backstory was supposed to be revealed as the main piece of juicy information during the sequel's climax. However, George Miller wanted the film to have a wider range of audience, so he decided to make Lord Humungus a former military man, possibly to critique the military, or because many people who didn't see the first film would inevitably miss out on the obvious connection. Ironically, at the end, the final script of The Road Warrior was trimmed down to such a point that even subtle hints of Humungus's military background became minimal and easy to overlook. I think Lord Humungus's character is an evident influence on Fury Road's iconic villain, Immortan Joe, but we'll come to that a bit later. Humungus was a terrifying yet shockingly flamboyant warlord who ruled the desert of Wasteland with an iron fist. This masked murderer was weirdly well-spoken and commanded a loyal band of devoted followers, including that crazy guy Wes, who were all ready to die at his command. Even though he was at the heart of the film, we never get to see the real face that remained hidden behind Lord Humungus's mask. This is probably because Max and Humungus barely cross each other's paths or directly interact throughout the film's relentless action. This was originally supposed to be revealed at the very end of The Road Warrior, followed by how Jim Goose managed to survive before he went absolutely cuckoo and then gained the bad kind of cult following by becoming the campy infamous warlord, who was indeed the film's main focus. I think Miller really missed out on a bombshell twist by not adding this tidbit in the film, as it would have explained why Max and Humungus rarely interacted, because Humungus knew that if he spent too long talking to Max, the latter would eventually recognize his former partner. How would the backstory completely change the course of the Mad Max franchise? I personally believe this twist would have been a powerful storytelling shock that the audience wouldn't see coming from miles away. And given how little the Mad Max movies have to offer from a plot perspective, this clever connection would have come as a huge bonus. It held the potential of completely changing the idea of the film from a campy yet superior action flick to more of a psychological action thriller. But the real reason why Miller should have retained this backstory within The Road Warrior is how this missing plot could have served as the bridge between the original, relatively realistic Mad Max, connecting Max's pre-apocalypse world to the more outlandish setting of The Road Warrior. Many fans have noticed a significant shift in tone between the gritty 1979 thriller Mad Max, which has moments that remind you of movies like Straw Dogs or Deliverance, and its more uber-influential sequels. These sequels, with their over-the-top and weirdly cartoonish elements, are really more comparable to films like The Running Man or Waterworld. So, introducing a villain like Lord Humungus, along with Max's character development through this transition, could have effectively shown the psychological impact of the apocalypse in the Mad Max universe. This would have made the more exaggerated elements in the sequel feel more believable and connected to the characters' experiences within this dystopian world. I can only imagine how insanely clever the idea of making Goose the person behind Lord Humungus's mask would have been. It had basically reinforced the recurring theme of the Mad Max series, of how desperate situations can create authoritarian and despotic leaders who once excessively relied on law enforcement and military power. However, as I've discussed before, by not explicitly linking the Road Warrior to the original Mad Max in this way, the sequel became more accessible to a wider audience, which was eventually a better decision made for the commercial aspect. As the first-time viewers didn't feel left out by seeing a relatively good sequel, George Miller could go on to weave an entire franchise riding on the Road Warrior's fame.
We go in, we kill,
Did Lord Humungus influence the making of Immortan Joe's character? Even with Lord Humungus's backstory idea being sacked, I think we still got lucky as the Mad Max franchise revisited the abandoned twist through the backstory of Fury Road's dictatorial villain, Immortan Joe. According to the comics that ties in with the film, Immortan Joe was a morally bankrupt ex-general who basically grabbed the gaping power hole that opened up in the post-apocalyptic chaos, and eventually became the self-serving ruthless despot we see in Fury Road and Furiosa. This backstory allowed Fury Road to critique the same power dynamics that the previously proposed Goose twist would have explored, all without expecting its audience to be familiar with the franchise's lore before they decided to watch the film. Thus, while the Road Warrior's twist wasn't used, its influence on Immortan Joe and the War Boys ensured that the newcomers could still enjoy the Mad Max series without feeling lost. Apart from this obvious influence, the missing Lord Humungus backstory would also tie into the fact that, just like Immortan Joe used his military background to create a bone-chillingly cruel and unjust society, the idea of Jim Goose turning into a psychotic warlord serves as a reminder that even those tasked with upholding order could succumb to the darkness propagated by a societal collapse. While some become tyrants, others, like Max, tightly clutch onto their moral compass. So, reinstating this backstory would have strengthened the franchise's message that a badge surely doesn't guarantee morality in the face of chaos. And even if a similar theme was later explored through Immortan Joe's backstory in Fury Road, it could have been more impactful if it came from Max's former partner in the first sequel film. How did Mad Max 2 The Road Warrior portray Lord Humungus? Apart from a few unnoticeable tidbits, there's not much shown about Lord Humungus's origin in the film. If you just watch the film, you'll basically see a psychopath with a military background, who likely suffered severe burns or injuries from an accident or explosion. It's just assumed that sometime between the gap of Mad Max and Mad Max 2, Humungus rose to power and led a gang of marauders, bikers, berserkers, and generally psychotic people. But his group shared one widely exhibited aspect, and that was androgyny. Through the course of The Road Warrior, we're given many hints of how Humungus once lost someone very dear to him, and it was further reinforced when he tried to restrain Wes during a tense moment. Plus, if you remember his gun case, it had a picture of a British military man and a woman along with other military insignia from different countries like the Commonwealth, Nazi, and Australian forces, suggesting that Humungus might have been of British or German ancestry. Maybe he later served in the Australian military forces, and the photo in his gun case could be of his grandparents or great-grandparents. Now, if you take a harder look, you'll notice that the character of Lord Humungus was created by splitting up the typical antagonist archetype into three distinct characters, each embodying different traits. Humungus represented sheer physical strength, while Toady served as the voice and communicator, and Wes embodied the element of madness and unpredictability. Lord Humungus commanded his otherwise unruly faction through fear and violence, as they roamed about on an indefinite campaign, looking to steal necessary resources and killing anyone who tried to stop them. Given that their fleet stood on assorted vehicles, their main focus was always acquiring more petrol. oil. So, when they got to know about a working oil refinery, Humungus didn't think twice about planning to take over the pump and extract all the petrol they could take along. But unlike his ruthless followers, who wanted to forcefully take control of the compound by roguely storming in, Lord Humungus tried a different approach. He spoke with eloquence and reason, almost requesting the compound's inhabitants to surrender peacefully. He even promised them safety in exchange for compliance, but again, he was a villain, so he also warned them of all the dire consequences for those who resisted. The ones who refused to peacefully surrender or were captured while escaping had to face inexplicable torture and death. However, when two people from the compound still defied these threats and attempted to escape, their actions managed to draw the attention of our hero, Max Rokotansky, who was then trying to survive as a drifter in a post-apocalyptic world. Well, this is what ultimately led to the inevitable downfall of the great Lord Humungus, as Max decided to become their messiah and help the compounders make it out alive with their valuable tanker of petrol. During the final chase, Lord Humungus personally took down Papagallo with his spear. He even kept shooting the tanker while Max was driving, but when the gyro pilot temporarily incapacitated him, Humungus activated a nitrous booster in an attempt to catch up to Max, the tanker, and the caravan. However, he was oblivious of the fact that Max had turned the tanker around and was heading in the opposite direction. This ultimately led to a fatal head-on collision between Humungus and Max, thus killing both Humungus and Wes, who were upon the hood of the tanker. Why did Lord Humungus never take off his mask? Firstly, the character design was conceived during the first draft to ensure that Lord Humungus's real identity as Max's former partner Jim Goose remained concealed till it was revealed in the climax. But when the backstory was trimmed off, Miller still decided to stick with the mask and his entire attire to make him look like an impressionable villain to the audience. According to the lore, Humungus had suffered major facial burns during his time at the military and wore the Cooper HM6 hockey mask to cover it up. The mask initially was made of white plastic, but it was later painted silver and given black details to mimic a steel-like appearance with a worn patina. To add more texture, the wire mesh was added under the holes of the mask. Apparently, even the original straps were swapped out for leather ones to further highlight the androgyny aspect, as it was secured with copper rivets for a more rugged look. Apart from that, to make him seem more outlandish and menacing, his collar was made from a cervical collar covered in rubber from inner tubes, and featured 4 springs attached to it with 2 at the front and 2 at the back and sides. These springs were further connected to the sheet metal pieces that were shaped to fit the collar and seemed to be rather riveted into it. The metal pieces also covered what looked like splits in the collar, making it seem like they acted as joints to hold the collar together. He also wore a large leather chest harness, featuring straps that wrapped around the torso, waist and groin. Additionally, there were scraps of black garment leather riveted to the harness, especially on the shoulders and sides to make him look more rugged to the eye. And not just that, Miller went full BDSM mode by making Lord Humungus wear leather hot pants with a harness running over them. On top of the hot pants, he even wore a flat triangular codpiece adorned with checker-patterned cone studs. To further bring his character together, Humungus was laced up with a leather gauntlet covered with cone studs on his left forearm. On his right wrist, he sported a leather bracelet fastened with straps and decorated with similar studs. Lastly, he wore combat boots to bring his look together, to a point that you completely forget the man behind this costume and only focus on the ominous-looking villain that he is. Although Lord Humungus does come off as the better evil when you compare him to Immortan Joe, this kind of insanity isn't something we commonly see in the villains of the modern day. With that being said, there are a few elements from this sequel that the Mad Max franchise should most definitely not plan on revisiting, especially the outdated S&M stereotypes we saw in the 1981 film. However, I think the entire idea of power being abused to shape the societies of a post-apocalyptic dystopia has pretty much become the soul of every Mad Max film. So maybe we could potentially witness some of the societal breakdown depicted in Goose's transformation in the upcoming 5th film, The Wasteland, which has promised to set itself before the action of Fury Road. But we can't know for sure how the next Mad Max adventure would unfold, simply because The Wasteland hasn't even gone into production yet. But what do you think? Will the next Mad Max saga document the events that took place before Fury Road? Let us know in the comment box below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks everyone.